excited about it because this is one of those topics that, we hear about. In fact, I was thinking back to when I first started hearing about donor profiles and all of that. And I remember thinking, I mean, this was a number of years ago, and I was thinking, so what is a donor profile? And it was so funny because recently I went back in to look at, what does Google say about that? Because you know how it is, we always check Google, or I guess now we go to AI to chat GPT. But I looked there and it was kind of like this really obvious answer, which really didn't help a whole lot. And it actually just, there are a number of ways to look at profiling for donors, but it's really the intention to say, how do we get to know our donors and track and follow who they are, understand them so we can better be in relationship with them, communicate with them, and ultimately serve them. So here's what basically Google says is, think of a donor profile as a detailed portrait of your financial supporters. And I'm thinking, duh, that's kind of obvious. But a donor profile, it's something that we want to be able to have easy access to so that we can see all these different areas of information about who our donors are at our fingertips. And if you have a few donors, then this is something you want to start doing now. You might think, I know all these people by personally, and that's wonderful, but you'll never be able to scale that idea. Because as soon as you get 25, 50, 100, now you're starting to forget, you're starting to not know. And then if you have thousands of donors, no possible way you'll be able to remember them all. So we want to be able to not only know the basic demographics of who they are, where they live, what their name is, who's in their family, but we also want to know what they care about. We want to be able to know what kinds of things do they give to, what motivates them. Now we're starting to peel the onion back about who our donors are, and then that should help us know how to best communicate. So this idea of creating profiles for our donors means that not only can we identify who they are, but we know kind of characteristics about what they do, their behaviors, what motivates them, what gets them engaged, so that we know how to best serve them. So if you want to understand your donor base as a whole, or if you want to just target a certain group of donors, or even if you're trying to really hone into a specific donor type, you want to work on how do we gather information and then how do we use that information. So today we're going to focus really on looking at three different ways, actually two, and then we'll touch on a third. But there are lots of different ways to do profiles, and we're going to start with the basics. So, why is it important? Ultimately, donor profiles help us engage with our existing donors and help us build those lasting relationships that we want, so that eventually we are also attracting new donors that have the same interests we have. This is a donor profile. When you know who those people are and you can go back, then you understand your donor, you communicate more effectively with them. That builds trust, and trust leads to longer lasting relationships. It's just like any relationship. You have to know who they are, what they like, what kind of communication they're interested in, what medium of communication they like, in order to improve your way of engaging with them, especially when you have a lot of them. So this idea of a profile is going to help reduce the wasted time, money, and your own sanity. You're going to improve your sanity, not reduce it, in order to keep you engaged with your donors so that they can support the incredible work that you're doing. So ultimately, we're trying to optimize your resources and your system so that you know who they are, you can communicate with them, retain them longer, and provide fulfilling, experiences with you, with the whole organization, that your donors not only want to stay with, but they want to share it with others. So donor profiles are going to help you understand your donor base. They're going to help you tailor your communication and ultimately help your fundraising strategies be more effective, so those relationships and people will stay longer. So that's a win-win. If you're a fundraiser and you're trying to go out there and raise money, you need to be able to say, this isn't just about a transactional exchange of money. You can do that, but then that doesn't mean people are going to come back. But profiling, knowing who they are, helps people feel like they're actually connected. Now, here's a question for all of us this morning, and you can use the chat to do it. So I've got my chat up so I can see responses to this. Does anyone know what you call a fisherman that uses a rod, line, hook, and bait? Like there's a formal name. I don't know if you have any fishermen or fisherwomen in our group today. Anyone know what you call a fisherman? that uses rod line. Oh, Tim Toby. Nice. Exactly. It's an angler. So that's what we want to look at here is, what does this mean? So if you are somebody that is using rod, line, hook, and bait, you have to think, what makes someone good at it? Why do people get so addicted to it? And I'll tell you, it's not the fancy pole or look at those outfits. It's not their fancy gear. But what makes somebody really good at fishing is knowing the type of fish they want to catch. So they have to know their fish. So these guys are out in the open seas. They're not, looking for the kind of fish that you would find in a lake or in a stream, but they're probably looking for salmon or bigger fish, a marlin or something. They need to know the type of fish they want to catch. Then they learn not only about the type of fish, but what are the behaviors of the fish? Where does the fish swim? Is it down at the bottom? Is it a top feeder? What is it like to eat? When are they most active? And there's a whole bunch of things that they need to know in order to be good at that skill of catching fish. And then, of course, they need to be able to practice it. The more they do it, the more they learn. And so it's not just about reading, being book smart, knowing a lot of information, but it's being able to take that information and implement it so that you are good at actually catching fish, not just sitting out there all day with your line in there. That's not as much fun as actually catching the fish and enjoying that. And then I think the last big thing that we have the good lesson for us about anglers is you need to be focused and patient. So it doesn't, you don't catch fish all the time. You're not reeling them in one at a time. It's not like a net fishing. You put it out, wait, and drag them all in. It's doing it and being skilled to understand, having the knowledge, the skill, and the focus to be able to attract and keep those, in our case, donors that are really aligned to your mission. So in essence, what we're saying here is it's kind of like as a fundraiser, this is you. You want to be a good at your skill, like these anglers are good at catching fish, to be able to understand the type of people you want and what are their behaviors and activities. And that's going to enable you to be more effective at retaining as well as attracting new donors. So what is in what are we trying to keep in terms of donor profile information? So a lot of times it's just basic contact information, who they are they married, single, where do they live, what's their phone number, what's their email address. But then we get into the demographics that are a little more specific. It could be the marital status, age, even birthdays. Let me ask this question, someone in the chat. Why would you want to know birthdays for your donors? And okay, we'll take away the obvious one so that you could send them a birthday card. Sure, that's one way. But can you think of any other thing that it would enable you as a fundraiser to do if you know birthdays of your donors besides sending them a birthday card? That's a good one. I'm sure a bunch of you were thinking about that one. Okay, I like tracking important dates. Yep, important dates, great. That's excellent, Sarah. What else besides sending them a card would help you as to get a birthday? Okay, a birthday fundraiser. That's excellent idea. So when people come around, when a birthday comes around, you can, particularly with families and people that have young kids, they love to do birthdays that way. Or we see it a lot on Facebook right now, is you can do a birthday online and get other people to give to that. Excellent idea. Anyone else want to throw in an idea about birthdays? So part of this question of what we do for a profiling, we don't want to just gather info. We always want to be thinking about what are we going to do with it? Because having more info isn't necessarily helpful. It becomes bulky, but we want to be intentional and strategic about what we gather. Here's something that I was talking to one of our good friends, Bobby with Go10, and he said, I want to get birthday information so that specifically I can target those that are turning 72. Anyone know why 72? Because at that age,
Yes.
yes, Tim said, say it, Tim, why?
Well, because they have to have a certain amount of distributions to be compliant with the IRS. There's tax implications if they are not giving or spending the money that they've earned, if
They've
I'm saying
earned.
that correctly.
No, it's exactly right. So when you hit 72, and if you have all this money you put into your IRAs, you have to, it's required by law, take a minimum deduction, a minimum, not deduction, a minimum distribution every year. And you know what? So many people in this baby boom generation, they don't want to take their distributions because why? Because they have to pay taxes on it. So now what people are doing is, as a fundraiser, you're saying, hey, we know your 72th birthday is coming up. Don't know if you're required to take any minimum distributions, but we have this offer for you to give to a charity tax-free to meet your minimum distribution requirement. So that's a great tool, but you can't do that if you don't have a birthday. So that's one of the reasons. Employment, you want to know, that's one of the demographics because you want to know who employers are. And that's a great way to know maybe employers match money. You want to find out relational, who are their family members, what business or what church are they connected to? So all of these kinds of things are the active things you want to gather in order to track and understand who your donors are. Of course, giving history, but here's one that I like, and that is first contact. How did we connect to this person? Was it a referral? Was it an online person? Was it a response to a fundraiser that happened? Or, some other activity? Was it a friend of a friend? There's all kinds of ways, but how did we first connect to this person? First contact, preferred communication methods. Some of these things can go in notes, but they're also things that can be tracked by a good CRM. All right, let me ask this question to everyone in the chats, and I would love it if everyone would type in their answer to this is, how do you currently track donor information? What is your system? Do you use an Excel document? Do you use a Google document? Do you have a CRM? If you have a CRM, which one do you use? And then you can always say, does your CRM do a good job of helping you track and keep donor data? Well, you can say yes or no. So if I said we're using one of my favorites, Virtuous. We're using Virtuous, and yes, it's outstanding to help us. Or you say, oh, we use Neon and we think it's okay, So type in there, how do you track? All right, thanks, Natasha. Donor Direct SC, what do you think? It's okay. See that? Good. Google Spreadsheets. All right, that's another way. Google Docs is another way to do that. So that part of this question right up front is to say, do we know how to use the systems that will help us best keep this so that we can gather this information and utilize it as a fundraiser? All right, anyone besides Tim, Natasha, Sarah, and Michaela that has a different system that hasn't been listed on there? Sherry, Bloomerang, yay, I figured there'd be at least one Bloomerang. Quite a number of folks that we know we work with use Bloomerang. All right, so those are some good options. And yeah, a lot of people are learning about Bloomerang. The other thing I want to highlight on here is that right column where it talks about preferred communication, interest, passion, motivation. We call a lot of these things psychographics versus demographics. It's meaning, what do people care about? What is behind their giving? What motivates people? What are their areas of passion? What are their objections and frustrations? Those are the kinds of things we also want to track to better understand our donors. So part of this process is thinking, how do we do this? From a really practical perspective, some of these things can be gathered in different ways. Some of these things can be automated, but we want to, in order to do donor profiling and make this effective, especially when you have a lot of donors, you really need to be intentional and think through those systems. So after today, I'm going to send out some worksheets. When we were doing this same training in person, we took time and we did them together. But you're going to have some worksheets that you can go away and do a follow-up activity, you and your team. And there's some basic questions in there that you can sit and work on, start to brainstorm your thoughts, have a discussion around. But it says, what donor information are we gathering for all of our donors? What donor information is the most helpful for us? So to really evaluate that, because not all information, as I said before, is useful. So you really want to focus what you're going to be gathering, because you don't need this bulk information. What do you want or you wish you could have that you don't have? So that number 3 is gold. It's like, okay, we don't do birthdays, or all right, we don't know how to do family as well. We don't connect that in there, and our systems are struggling with that, but we need to fix that so that we can see how we relate to people and how their relational different relationships connect, maybe their church. So what do you want to do? And then what donor information do you need to start intentionally gathering? So these are the kinds of activities that you and your team can sit and look at and go, all right, you know what? here in Arizona, there is an option for tax credits, and we've been just recently approved for tax credits. So we need to start identifying which people that are our donors that are in Arizona so we could target communication around tax crediting. Or you say, all right, we want to start identifying age, who is retired. We want to be able to identify younger people that are millennials. So we really do need to pull in birth dates so we can track people by those. So start to think about what it is you want to track and what's missing, what you don't have, and how do you do that practically. So that's a follow-up activity from today's session.
Hey,
Now,
Heather.
here's three. Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, just real quick, as you mentioned birthdays again, Sarah was asking up front a few minutes ago, what's a good way to respectfully request somebody's birth year and birthday? What would you say about that?
Perfect lead in right here, because what we're saying is three things really important to create an effective profile. One is gathering information. And, as we just said, give me 1 second. I'm going to hit that hard in a second. You have to decide what information is critical that you want. And then when you decide that, how do you do that? There's two ways, broad ways to do that. One is direct information. So you can use donor surveys, you can use forms to ask people. And Sarah, you could go and have a coffee chat and ask people. Now, I know, Sarah, you work with major donors, mid-level donors, you work with corporations, so you do a lot of one-on-one. And that's a great time and question to go, I've done this with some of my own personal donors, said, I like to celebrate birthdays, which was kind of a commitment on my side. So I better do something if I'm going to gather this information. But, would you share your birthday with us? Because we would love to be able to celebrate that with you. Then you can gather that and bring that into your system after you meet one-on-one. When you work with groups, you can do a donor survey that says, we want to get to know you better. And I love doing this right after someone becomes a new donor, because now, that's that season. I've got a couple of brand new friends because I just recently moved, and I don't know their birthdays. And I'm like, okay, I want to know their birthday. So when do I ask that question? So there's a little bit of that sensitivity of how do we do it and when. And it's really helpful to do it when you're in a new relationship. And then it's also helpful to do it when you're in face to face. So you can use these different things. You can also do interviewing of different people. You can research, you can find some of this out on LinkedIn, on Facebook. I did a bunch of searching on those areas to fill out my donor groups that I was focused on. So you can do some research to determine that as well. So that's direct information from people. And then there's this indirect. And this is when you're really in an environment where you're not sitting down necessarily face to face, but you might be, and it's kind of what I even said, in social media, researching there. That's more indirect, not directly asking them. Or if you're at an event and you hear someone talking about, hey, my birthday just was last week, I write it down and I go, put it in, or I go, hey, I heard you just had a birthday. When was it? That's a little more indirectly getting information from it. So those two ways, but I would say it is really good to go, what's my strategy to gather information? And then what's my strategy to do something with that information? So I wanted to ask in the chat, are there any things that as a group or as individuals that you do that help you gather information easily and make getting useful information? Anyone have any little secrets that it's like you've done it and it's really made gathering information easy? And well, I'll get to that question later, but I would say yes, it does differ from that. All right. If you have any great ideas, always dump them into the chat. Share things that you've learned along the way that makes doing this stuff easy or even more useful, because we would love you to learn from one another. So go ahead and do that whenever that comes up. So Sarah, does that answer your question? Or at least start to?
Yeah, it mostly was emphasis on the birth year. Like donors have no problem telling me when their birthday is, but they tend to leave off the year because a lot of my donors tend to be over 50. So that's the key part. But because I don't want to say, well, I really want to know your birth year so that when you are 71, we have a conversation about, max the
Exactly.
contributions thing. So that's why I was asking about the year. The day,
Year, okay,
people
good.
are always thrilled to give me their birth year,
Date.
and then their anniversary, they'll give me the year, but birthday, it's funny, they leave off the year. So
if you're you can just ask some casual follow-up questions when they give you their birth date. Just ask them if they're in any pickleball leagues, and if they say yes, then you probably have a range maybe of how old they are. Just kidding.
But I
Way to
do,
go, Jonathan.
I
You're
like your
picking on us
idea.
pickleballers.
I do pride myself on being a stalker, and I like your idea of the Facebook thing, but I wouldn't always be connected through Facebook, to do that kind of. And again, year people tend to leave off. So, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I also like the pickleball tip. Thanks, Jonathan.
And I do love using a form, and once in a while I just blame it on, hey, we're updating our systems and we would like to know. And on the form, make sure it's required and it is the one that requires month, date, year. Then they have to give it to you that way. So forms are helpful to kind of push that information out there as well. But you can do a group survey, you can do a group interview, and just say, hey, we're gathering this because our systems require to have a year, so would you give it to me? Blame it on the system. And that's one way to do it. And when you sit down, some folks have just said, how do we even start gathering information? And one of the things about being in donor relationships is that listening is one of the most important skills. So you ask a person, tell me about your family. It'll go down a lot of paths. Tell me about what you guys like to do. Where do you like to vacation? Even what are your favorite blah, blah, blah. Because the more you get to know about that person, these are those psychographic details that help you understand who they are, not just where they function and all those basic info. That leads toward transactional, but psychographics lead more towards the transformational, relational context that we want to be at. But any open-ended questions, then you can lead into some of those closed-ended questions, because you can blame it on, hey, our systems is looking for this. I would love to write this down. So and let the people know why it's important to you, other than, oh, because when you're 72, I want to email you when you have to give money away. But what are other, causes that people care about? What's a great open-ended question to just get to know people, and they know, hey, you're not just asking them because you're going to take their money, but you're wanting to know who they are and get information about them, because you really are trying to build a relationship. So open-ended questions that give people room to talk and you room to listen. It's amazing the amount of information people share. So I know a bunch of you do that really well already. All right, we can't emphasize this enough. The how you organize the information is getting a way in which you can do that with a contact resource, system of some kind that you feel like is going to help you as a fundraiser track these relationships. Excuse me, you just can't do it on your own in your mind. I mean, we know somebody, she was an executive director, brilliant, smart woman. She had, I think, more than 2,000 donors, and the core donorship, she knew them well, and it was mostly up in her mind. And she had Excel spreadsheets because she was really good at that. And she managed more than 2,000 donors all by Excel spreadsheets in her head. The challenge was she retired, and when she transitioned that to the next group, that became problematic because they didn't have all of that great information down in a way that was shareable. And so the key here is that everyone needs to be able to get access to this shareable information about it. So if Sarah, you keep information about your donors, and yet you have Sherry, if she was in your organization, if she can't see what you're doing, then she doesn't know, if she has to engage with them, what you've told them. So we want to make sure that it's easily accessible for everyone in your organization to be able to use that data and add to it in a way that everyone knows. So utilize your CRM platforms in a way that gets you the information. If you can get automation you can create a form that will automatically input that information in your system. That's one of the reasons why we love Virtuous, because they're very donor responsive and they want to get that information in there. There are a lot of other great ones that do that, but built-in tools that'll help you gather that information, organize it, categorize donors based on things, which we're going to talk more about, and then establish your own organizational standard operating practices to say, how do we put information in? Where do we keep it? Is it in the note section? Or is there actually a form, is there a place in your system where you have single versus married? So you all need to be able to do the same thing, because if you don't, then you're going to have information in various places. So when it comes to donor profiling, it takes time up front to build these systems so that you can use them effectively. But once you do, and you have that information accessible, then now you're going to be able to use that in a powerful way. But third thing, well, actually, let me say this. Yeah, before that, I love this quote because it's so true. Any tool a man or woman needs in his or her business, he's paying for already, whether he has it or not. Think about that. Like, if you say you need a hammer, but you don't have one, you're going to lose business day after day because you can't hammer in nails. You can't drive the nails in. So you're losing business because you don't have the tool that you need. So you're actually paying for it by loss of business by not having a hammer, just as realistically as if you paid for having a hammer. Now, I know a hammer is a lot cheaper than a CRM system or other add-ins that go in, but I will definitely say that we have seen this over and over again. Pay for the right CRM, build it so that you can get information in there about your donors. You have tools, add-ins, all that you need so that you can do the job you need. You are going to be paying for it whether you have it or not. So that's something to consider as you continue to work on building profiles. Last thing here is accuracy. So updated and accurate data is really critical. When you work with 25 donors, you might be able to keep all of that details in your mind clear, but you may not translate it to somebody's age. And then if you're getting older like me, you might forget certain things. So that becomes dangerous, because there's nothing worse than sending a well thought piece of communication to a donor or sitting down face to face with a donor, and then you're talking to them and you only are partially accurate to what they know they have done, to what they know they have shared about who they are and what they care about. And if you're only partially accurate, even if you're 80% accurate, that 20% lack of accuracy gets in the way and becomes almost offensive to a donor. So accuracy matters. You have to spend time on getting this stuff into your system so that in the early part of your process, or spend the time now before you continue to grow and scale, so that what you know about your major gift donors is correct. What you know about your monthly donors is accurate and up to date. And then if you can go out and you make communication on it, you have confidence that you're communicating from a picture of that whole donor. It's not that one person has some information and a different person has other information. It needs to be pooled together, and those systems are clear. So the systems and tools being updated, determining how to verify donor data is accurate, identify who's responsible for regularly updating the profiles, and it could be per donor type, or it could be overall, depending upon your organization and size. Establishing regular rhythms for analyzing, updating, and organizing your donor data. It has to happen. It's like organizing your closet. Many of us let it go, sit there and piles up. And then if you do what I just did, I moved, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, look at all this. And now my closet is all organized. How wonderful it is. And now I can easily access what I need. So we need regular rhythms to help us do that, rather than just not doing it for a long time. So that's what I wanted to share about just basically these individual donor profiles. They need to be targeted, intentional data for specific donors, so that you can have confidence that when you communicate with them, that you know who they are, what they're all about, what they care about. But once you do that, then you can start to move toward this idea of segmenting donor profiles. That means making a group of donors that are common to a number of factors, that now you start to understand them as a group. What motivates them? What commonalities do they have, so that we can communicate effectively to groups of people, and our communication can be more targeted, more specific, more effective. They feel known, heard, understood, instead of it being a mismatch. So I'm a monthly donor for one organization, and I got a piece of mail that invited me to become a monthly donor. Now, it didn't offend me, didn't make me mad, but it made me think, oh, I already am. They don't realize that. just was a little bit of a mismatch. And if I have a bunch of those that begin to happen, then you start to feel like I'm just a number, or I'm just an ATM that they go and they get money from. So you want to segment your communication so that you can communicate effectively with the donors that you have, so they are feeling understood, seen, heard, and known. So this process is going to incredibly help you as a fundraiser, reduce your amount of extra time out there, and reduce that friction that happens. And then ultimately, and this is, Tim, what you were just talking about, kind of going to what is known as a donor persona. And Kingdom Analytics talks about a mosaic, and there's a lot of work on mosaics, not just in fundraising, but out there looking at donor groups that actually you kind of give a fictional, hypothetical, representational image, and sometimes even a name that helps you understand these people even at a deeper level than just segmenting a group. So when you segment a group, you say, okay, here's a bunch of people that give over $5,000. We're going to segment them based on their giving behavior. But when you do a persona, you say, here is Rich Richie, and he is one of our wealthiest donors, and this is a donor type, that we give him this hypothetical representation, and I'll show you the power of that. That's the one we're not going to touch as much because I'll point at another group. But donor segmentation, very powerful, time saver in a lot of ways. And we typically start with this idea of giving behavior. We love to break people up into monthly givers, reoccurring givers. We give them major givers, so they're giving major gifts over 5,000, over 10,000, or whatever your number is. We like to talk about givers based on their money, but we have to realize that kind of does come across to a donor. It's all about how much they give. And there's a lot of other commonalities that groups of donors have. And we want to connect to them not just by their dollar amount that they give us, but by so much more. So that's why we want to segment and understand the profile and make a profile that goes bigger than just what they give. So we look at communication preferences. Where do they like to give? There are, and even if you look at major donors, and this is one of the things that Kingdom Analytics, who they did a session for us earlier, and I'll point to you where you can listen to that on our website, but they highlighted that with major donors and a lot of people that are in that area of giving large gifts, they often are communicating most on LinkedIn. That's where you're going to find them. And so if you know that, it's not just about how much they give, it's about where do they communicate. When you look at other things, what motivates people? What are their interests on their common interests they have? They want to make a legacy impact. That usually is that higher level. The monthly givers may be saying, what we care about is getting the job done on the everyday level. We want to accomplish all of this. So you want to see all of that, and even looking at that level of engagement, because some people want a higher level of engagement, touch point. They want to connect directly with your CEO. Some people are like, my engagement level, I want to hear from you quarterly and no more, or I want to hear from you monthly. So these are the things that you want to begin to understand with groups of donors so that you can begin to communicate with those groups in an effective way, because there's no way you can communicate individually with 2,000 or more donors. So we have to start to group them, even if we're going to communicate with them sitting down at a coffee shop one at a time. We can group them to understand them better. So another worksheet that you'll get as a great follow-up activity, you start to talk about how do we currently segment our donors? Maybe you already do some of that, and you already communicate differently with different types of donors. So we call them a donor type, is a different type of donor. What are your donor types that give you that have the greatest number? If you looked at all of your donors and you say, where's the biggest bulk? I know for Natasha, your group, it's with your sponsorship. That's your biggest number of donors in Mohi. And so you being aware of that, you think, okay, this is where our biggest group is. So how do we want to look at that as a group and define who they are? What donor types represent the most income? A lot of times with our donors, the smallest number of donors give the most. So what is that group, and how would you segment them? How would you then define who they are? And I love number 4 question. What donor type do you think represents the greatest giving potential for you this year? Type it into the chat box. What is the donor type? You know, if you segmented a group and you called them this, what's that group? Is it your monthly donors? That's where you think you could grow the most, that has the greatest giving potential for this year? What do you think in your grouping of areas? Do you have an idea, a gut feel that this is the group that we have the most potential to gain? Because if you can think of that, then you know, all right, we're going to start to focus our communication. We're going to get to know those donors better. And then we can create that donor group, segmented donor profile around that. All right, recurring sponsors. All right, that's great, Tim. So when you are aware of where you see the greatest potential, then you can start to target your profiling around that. How about, is there a donor type you want to know more about and you really feel like this year's the year to focus on getting them? Maybe it's millennials because you've heard millennials are giving. Or maybe for some of you it is retired people and you want to work on people that would be interested in planned giving. So thinking about this helps you know where to focus your attention, how to segment people, and then begin to identify what are the commonalities that are in that group so we can create a profile and understand them. Where are they at? What do they want to hear from us? How often do they want to hear from? All of those things is what you want to define. So this first thing is you're looking at what you're doing now and starting to evaluate, analyze and evaluate where it is you think you could work the most. Was there a comment, question there?
No, we're good. We're clear in the chat box.
All right, excellent. So all of these are great follow-up activities for you and your team to sit down and to start to think through very specifically in your context to know where should we start making some profiles of groups of donors that make sense, that would be really good use of our time for this year or for this quarter or for this, you know, this next section of time that we're focused. So these are some common segmenting groups. Some people start with looking at what's our most typical donor. So they look at it and they go, we've got, you know, 50 donors right now. We're pretty new. How would you describe your most typical donor? So you start to look for commonalities around the donors that you currently have. And you say, our most typical donor is the average age between 25 and 50. Right? That's a general idea of what age group they might be in. Our most typical donors are women, or our most typical donors are families. So to sit down and to think about how do you create a profile around your most typical donors is a very helpful thing, especially for smaller organizations, because then you're starting with who's attracted to you, who comes to you already. Some of you might say our most typical donor is my friend because I'm new. We just started our organization and all my family and friends are the people that are giving to us. So define that, own it, embrace that, and just say, all right, so that's where we're at. And then you start to look and go, how do we develop beyond what our most typical donor is? But you have to define it and create that profile of these commonalities that help you better understand it so you can serve them and then you can also grow. I highlighted most lucrative and I didn't call it major donors because I didn't want to limit us just to a group that we've used that name and that's just about their money. But how do you create a profile around those who are giving the most? Maybe it's your top 2 or 5% that are giving to you. Maybe it's over a dollar amount, but how do you define who they are? What are they interested in? You know, what are the ways you want to be, they want to be communicated to? What are the things they're telling you they want to invest in? So define that so that not only you, but that your marketing group, this for some of you, this is the me, myself, and I, because you are the fundraiser, the marketing group, the communications team, the programming. Some of you have a bigger organization, and these are multiple people that you need to define these profiles so that you and the group around you understand who these groupings are. So you want to lay that out. And then to be able to say, now, once we know who they are and what their commonalities are, what do we want to do with it? The ideal donor is, who do we want to attract? What would be an ideal donor that we want to attract? Or what we looked at before, what's our greatest potential donor? Maybe it is your reoccurring donor. So how do you define that reoccurring donor? What do they look like? Where are they located in the US in different places? What do you need to know more about? So there's maybe those empty ones. So these are the kinds of profiles you might start with. And I would say if you don't have any, pick one and just start working on one. There's a bunch of people from Mohi here today. In your groups, take those in your groups and go pick one. You might even in a grouping, because if you have thousands of sponsors, you might say, all right, we're going to define 3 profiles in our sponsorship group because there's some differences between different groups. You might do it by geography and go, we're going to do West Coast sponsors or East Coast, or we're going to do by church groups that you have there, or you can break it down so that you can kind of go to the next layer of understanding to see what donor types do you really want to know most about. And that way it's going to help you break it down and then go, now, how do we communicate? What do we need to talk about? So when you go to create a segmented donor group profile, you want to look for groups that represent a group you want to target. That's why I listed a bunch of that. And, then, I don't know if you see this, but the last bullet there, I put giving habits last because we tend to start with that first. Now, if you already have them grouped by giving habits, great. Now think deeper. So what is it that, that you know about them? Explore those commonalities in all the demographics. Explore those traits that you see in the psychographics, and then to start make some of those identify things that you think would help you in communicating. And when you dig down deeper on their habits, the frequency of when they give, common objections you heard from them, then you begin to get to know who they are and how to respond to them, how to communicate best to them. So understanding all these areas, build this kind of a profile, so then you can, look at what will help you communicate with them most effectively. That's how you define it. And then you begin to write it out, and you write a paragraph that tells you about who these people are. And you're always going to start first with those that you have. So that's our first priority. Who are the donors we have? Because everyone knows that it costs more to get a new donor than it does to keep a donor. So you want to start with the donors you have, unless you're doing an awesome job of that already. And then you can begin looking at your potential donors and who do you want to attract. Because you don't want to have this, basically having something that just keeps going and going. You've got a revolving door of donors. So you want to have strategies that keep you communicate with your current donors and keep them, and then you attract new donors that are going to come in and they're going to stay because you know how to communicate them. You know your donor groupings really well. So here's an example of one. We take the most lucrative. Maybe you call them major gift donors. You're going to invest your time to understand them and then do it. So you sit down and you go, all right, let's list everything we know about them. What are their common behaviors? What are the characteristics in common? What are their motivations? Both demographics, psychographics, and then I love this, think of your best donors in that group type. Then write down what are the qualities of those people that really have been your ideal. It's like, hey, when they come to the table, I wish all of our donors were just like Sam and Sue, because those people are so committed. So think of those few that are your best in that donor type and write down specific qualities that you really like about them. Because that's what you want to grow. It's like, how do we engage with people and grow them to be like that? And then even think about what attracted these people to you. So this is just helping you go down, peel the onion on knowing them, and then identify ways your current donors engage in your mission. So what do they actually do now? Are they going on trips to visit it? Are they coming in and they are volunteering in different hours that notice even when they volunteer? They're all volunteering in the morning, or they're all available in the evening. Look for all the commonalities that you can so that you can write out and create your written out donor profile for a group. So now you can actually create one. Start with whatever donor type. Here's an example. When we were in our group, we all worked on our most lucrative donors. We said, all right, when you write out all those characteristics, what insights do you gain from going through that process? So we actually did all that work. And you say, now, what did I learn from that? What are the insights that I've gained? And then what are my ideas for how I can improve my communication, how we can tailor fundraising campaigns that meet these desires for these donors? and that we can then have new strategies for how do we attract donors or we improve their engagement with us. So the clearer your profile, the more you're going to be able to see into some of these ideas rather than just shooting in the dark and with some of your best ideas not based on what you know about them. So I'm going to stop before I jump into the personas here. Questions, comments about that segmented group donor profiles and how to create them.
Hey, Heather, nothing on that specifically right now, but Tim was asking, when you use the word lucrative, how are you defining that word?
Yeah, I left it pretty ambiguous, didn't I? Most lucrative meaning, what? Yeah, I could see this could be taken in a variety. What is it that gives the most dollars in the end of the day? Like it's the most invested. It could be money, it could be time, it could be a combination of that. But that those donors that bring the most to your organization. And when we talk about donors, it usually is connected to money. It could be gift in kind for some of you. It could also be just plain dollars. So you would define that in your context.
Okay, and I know that was an open-ended question. It just for us specifically, that feels like it's the most typical also, just because of how we survive. So
Yeah. And knowing you, I mean, we just talked through that process of going, where do we even draw the lines in those lucrative? I mean, you say the most, you're kind of looking at that top 5% and going, so how do we want to engage with them? Now, you guys have layers of your most lucrative because you're a large organization. And so you can go down and break down each of those layers, like you've divided them, and go, how do we talk and how do we engage them differently? But to create a profile, it's like, how do we look at them, find the commonalities, and then break it down? So part of this job is breaking these down into segments that make sense to your context as an organization. And I know, Mo, you guys are doing that a lot right now. Yeah, very ambiguous word, lucrative. It kind of on intentional so that you define it. So we're not defining it for you here. We're saying you have to define that. So once you've done that and you create these segments and you begin to use your segmented donor groups to communicate with those groups, that's a big job. That's where I would say 80% of the work is in doing profiling. You have to bring in the right information for individual donors. Then you start to segment them into groups and you deal with them in these groups. And then you get to the place where you said, we know these people well enough. Now we're going to actually build a profile that is a persona or a mosaic or an avatar. Those are all words that now in the AI world, you can actually create this kind of an image of a person that is fictitious, hypothetical, that then you can actually engage with to help you think even deeper about what does that person think about who we are, what our messages are, what our newsletters say, what our annual reports say. And this is where it gets amazing. And I did this when I worked at Jack in the Box, we saw this happen because if you were from the Northwest, you knew that there was a big outbreak, E. coli outbreak, and the whole trust of consumers went in, just down, down, down. And so they had to create this whole, who is our best, in this case, customer? And when they did that, and they defined it, then they built all of their messaging, even Jack, with the big head and the kind of cocky attitude CEO, that came out of understanding that their primary ideal customer was a male between 18 to 29. And they defined so much out of it. They actually created, well ahead of its time, a persona. But not only did Jack in the Box do that, but I love this. Some of you will relate to this even better. It's like when you create a personality that then helps you not only have your donors fit into your world, now you're trying to take these personalities and say, how do we fit our messaging into their world? So it takes you into a different layer. Guess who else did this? Yep, Saddleback Church. So Rick Warren went out there, and this was way ahead of his time. Jonathan, was it in the 80s?
Oh
This-
yeah, yeah,
90s?
way back. I'd say 80s for sure.
Yeah, so he saw this idea, and he's those early adopter of ideas, and they created Saddleback Sam. And Saddleback Sam was the typical not only in this case, you can see this was a guy in this context, but this guy has a family that is living in their area in Orange County, and they were defining who is that person in their community they could engage with. So they created this avatar that nowadays this could actually be an avatar you interact with. But they got to know this avatar so well. They understood what motivated him. They understood where he spent his time, when he was available. They even said this is like a representation of an affluent baby boomer with a family of sorts. Gotta love that. Interesting California mindset. And it's a blend of an Old West, modern day savvy flair, reflecting the diversity of culture in Southern California. Not even sure if the guy was white, Hispanic, maybe a mix of those, on here. But
It had to be the 80s because I think that's a pager on his belt
Yeah.
as well.
And
Cell
and a
phone and a
brick phone. Yeah.
cell phone and a
and a
pager.
brick with an antenna on it,
Yeah.
But the point of this is that they knew what it was, and he got everyone on his team to understand this, and they gained insights. And this was really part of their expansion, because the more they understood, the more they developed their programming around their understanding of Saddleback Sam, the more they helped understand how do we grow him spiritually, how do we tailor all that we do to help provide meaningful connections and spiritual growth. And it worked. So, this is an example. Jack was an example. It worked. So we can do this in fundraising, and that is happening. Now, if you want to read more, you can go online and look at Reach Right Studios, and there's a lot of information on that one. But here's an example, and I got to give a shout out to One Cause, because One Cause has been really working at building profiles in their fundraising platform. And so this is an example of, and they often do, like Saddleback Sam, this is Carla, the gala supporter. So they broke down and made a group that was segmented group that was around their particular event, that this particular organization has this annual supporter for galas. And they said, what does our typical donor look like? And they said, all right, they're usually a director, an entrepreneur, a vice president of an organization. They can be urban or suburban. It's typically females between 40 to 50 years old, and they're professional. They want to get things done. They want to, help people, including their family and friends and colleagues, to be engaged, even in fundraising. They move fast, but if you engage me in your cause, I'm loyal, ardent supporter. So they define them assertive, focused, social, and influential. This is a persona that they've created because they got to know their segmented group. And now they've deep dived into it, almost giving this one a personality that will help us engage in their world, not have them engage in our world. Can you kind of see the difference of that? Jonathan, were you going to say something?
No, just that. I mean, look how valuable this is, right? To just understand all of this information and how it just enhances the relationship, helps you understand a person, and most importantly, helps you understand what might be the right next step for a person like this.
Yeah. It is taking us moving from just groupings that we have based on what people give. That's what most people think of donors like, to now we have more data on our donors. We're bringing in good individual profiles, and then we segment our groups. And now we've done a deep dive to really understand what is behind the people that engage with us most effectively, people that are going to be most attracted to them. And you can see they even put motivation was #1 up here. So they've got motivation that is listed. So they kind of know who they are, where they come from, demographics, but then they start to get into the psychographics, who they are, and what are they motivated by? What are their goals? What are their fears? What are their challenges? And that's the kind of information that does what Jonathan just said. Like, what's that next step? How do we engage with them in a way that makes them feel like they're really empowered to be a part of this and partner with us? So they had not only.
Oh, so sorry, Heather. Thought you were pausing there. Go for it.
One thing is not only a gala supporter, but then they went on and they actually started looking at other ways, peer-to-peer fundraisers. Who are those people and what draws them to them? And so they began to understand who to engage with and how to engage with them. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, right, one of the things that you don't see much of here at all is dollar amounts. right? A lot of times we just gauge people by recency, frequency, and dollar amount.
Yeah.
Right? When's the last time they give? How often do they give? And how much money do they give? The only dollar amount even listed here is under donation history in the third bullet point,
Yep.
5K in a direct appeal donation. Some other bullet points there, but not even dollar amounts there. So I think it's just really interesting, right? What they're focused on and just truly understanding a person and then helping that to lead them to be able to communicate with them in the right way. And again, identify the next steps that they might want to take.
Absolutely. So it moved away from just seeing people for the money they have, that relationship shifts, the communication shifts, and the money is a result of better communication, better ways of serving people. Whether it's someone you want to know more about, this is a group that created a persona around millennials because they really wanted to understand how to do that. So there's another worksheet, follow-up activity that you could do to do that. Now, some of you might be going, oh, there's too much here. Well, there are other trainings we have that can take you down this road. Here's one. We just did this on harnessing data. This goes into more of the persona side of things that Tim was talking about with mosaics. I encourage you to go. You won't be sorry you listen to this because it'll also help you with AI. It'll help you to say, how do we do some of this work? In fact, I even feel obsolete when we listen to Andrew talk through this. I'm like, oh, donor personas. You can even have ChatGPT write you one with some basic information. So, there's a lot available at our fingertips that can make this job easy and give you, and this is an example of a common Arizona mosaic that is out there that they've done the big work on. This is out there for people giving to nonprofits, is the sophisticated city dweller. They didn't name them because they're doing this really widely for a lot of organizations, but they know a lot about who they are, how they want to communicate, what's important, what's not important, what to ask, what to write, when to share with them. So that information you can even get to, if you listen to his thing, he will even give you your own persona, which I know, Tim, you did this. So Moe has got one. So let me jump in our last moment here to say all of this is going to lead you toward building your communication plan. And notice here, when you understand your personas, then you can lay out your communication with them based on who they are and what you know about them. So your profile is going to help you have better messaging, better timing, better channels of communication. And then you're going to have more responses, more opens, more people that are saying, I want to be a part of the thing you're doing. We want your communication to be these three things: intentional, doable. You're not trying to do more than is humanly possible. Sometimes we see people just driving themselves mad. Well-timed communication that has got messages focused on the donors that you have. That makes your life better. It keeps it simple, but it can look at how are we going to do this? Because communication is the cornerstone of every relationship. And so what do donors want? That's what we need to know. If you know your donor profile, you're going to know what they want. Generically, here's what they tell us they want: appreciation. They want some update, want two-way conversation. They want clear invitations. That's the stuff you want to be able to make sure that in your communication plan that you lay out what you're going to do with who. And so this is a group that did it by where their priority is. Their bulk of their communication is September, October, November. And then they have a January, February, March that they're basically doing major donor givers, major gift donors. Their communications in that first part of the year and then mid-year to others, but their biggest bulk is at the end of the year. And we say the goal here is to make sure you're stewarding both individual donors and group donor communication in a way that makes sense, that's doable for you, even if you're one person, being able to do that. So the more you do that, then the better off. And this one I would hit hard in a longer session, but if you can learn anything about communication planning, is there should always be at least 2 communications to every one ask. And if major donors, typically you're asking once a year and there should be a lot of communication between. You should never have communication that's ask, ask, ask. So that means you have to think about, how do we thank people for their part? How do we report on what's happening? Giving them people that, because nobody wants to feel like all you're doing is saying more and more and more and more. So communication needs to fill that. So A worksheet says, look at your plan, lay it out. What are we currently doing? Do some evaluation on it. See what your rhythm is on asking, thanking, reporting, and repeating that. And then pick a donor type and build your communication plan that has the right messaging method and the content so that you can connect. And then you just sit down and brainstorm, map that calendar out. And we have this in that worksheet that you'll get where you can build your own and you can look about it quarterly with donor types. What are you going to do? When are you going to talk to people? And then you can, even begin to automate some of that. So especially with groups, like your reoccurring donors, get some automated welcome series. And we've got an online session that Bobby Cox just did that really walks through these automated campaigns and how to do it, what to do it, what is a welcome series, when to do that, why do we want to do it, all of that. So we've got quite a bit so that what you're basically saying, if you're going to be, like we started out, a good angler, Jesus said, you're not going to just be a fisherman anymore. You're going to be a fisher of men. So we want to be responsive. And you say to people, come follow me as I follow Christ. You want to welcome donors in to do that, to come and join you. And then think about, all right, what are you going to take away today? How are you going to make this practical? And share whatever it is that you've taken away with one of your teammates. Do it in the next 48 hours so that you can begin to say, we're not going to just go to a training, but we want to do something with this. So what's your takeaway? Share it within 48 hours. Do something to apply what you've got to take those next steps into our sessions and into effective fundraising using really good donor profiles that enhance your communication. All right, Jonathan, I know we're going to stay on and take more questions or have people chat and ask some stuff. We're wrapping up a little bit afterwards, so I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, great stuff. And the other thing we always want to make sure you understand, and this is sort of a staple of ours, is if you're thinking, my goodness, where would I start? We have so many donors. We haven't done anything with this. We just always say, start somewhere. Start with a smaller group. Start with maybe your major givers and say, you know what, we're going to try to understand them a little bit more specifically, or a group of people that maybe haven't committed to be financial partners yet, but they're involved some other way. You seek to understand them a little bit more specifically, and again, for the purpose of communication and identifying the right next steps, and just understanding where people are in relationship to your work, and how God just wants to connect the two of you in an even greater way. So don't think you got to get it all figured out by this Friday. Just think about it and start somewhere, and just start where you feel like God is leading you to start with it. So.
And we invite you, if you write one, send it to us. We would love to see your donor persona that you're going to create from that. We give feedback if you want it. Otherwise, we'll encourage you and just say, way to go on that. And sometimes that we also will share that with others to give them an example of that, which we have some of those if you're looking for that.
That's right. That's right. Well, let me pray for us. And as Heather mentioned, we'll stay on the line for another 5 or 6 minutes. If any of you want to stay on and dialogue a little bit more, or maybe you've got a question that we didn't get to today. So let me pray for us and then we'll let you go. Heavenly Father, thank you so much again for this time together. God, help us not to be overwhelmed with this information, but Lord, I just pray that you would continue the conversation with us and sort it out for us a little bit. What's just maybe 1 or 2 steps you want us to take as a result of what we've heard today? God, I pray that you would speak to us about specific people and groups of people that you've brought our way, that you really want us to understand in a deeper way, so that we can have that genuine relationship with them, help them grow and advance and realize their potential, connected with the work of our organizations. Thank you again for these leaders, for what you're doing in them and through them. And I just pray that you would bless them in a special way as they move forward and do what you've called them to do. And we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.